Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we answer your questions on history, on current events, on culture, on political philosophy, on the strange doings of government, all those things that concern our life together as Canadians.
All right, now we have a question from Mike, and he says, did the British disarming Act in Scotland in the early 1700s have any relevance on the American Second Amendment, and why wasn't the right to bear arms in the original Constitution?
Well, yes, is the short answer, and it was. The thing about disarmament in the United Kingdom, including of the Scots because of their sympathy for the Stuart Pretenders, it's an exception to the general right to bear arms. Nobody ever considers a general disarming of the English. But periodically, they'll pick out some group who are regarded as enemies of the state or in some sense inherently untrustworthy, and they alone will be deprived of their arms. In the case of the Scots, it was partly a deliberate humiliation because the Scots had borne arms as the mark of free men quite literally from time immemorial. And so it was a humiliation as well as a practical measure. But it was intended to deal with a temporary danger of insurrection, which was not entirely imaginary. And when that danger was past, the restriction was lifted. And that is a noteworthy feature of arms control throughout the English-speaking world, including in Canada, until quite recently, that although specific groups may be singled out and disarmed, often for reasons that are frankly pure prejudice. The Irish labourers working on the canals here were thought to be swaggering around hammered and blasting away, which is an insulting and unfair stereotype. Aboriginals in this country were targeted for disarmament, as they were also in the United States. But in England, until at least 1920, nobody who was not specifically being picked on was ever disarmed, which tells you something about disarming the entire populace. Now, why wasn't the right to bear arms in the original Constitution? I'm taking this as a question about the United States, although, frankly, it could also be about Canada, so let me address both. When the American Constitution was originally written, it didn't have the Bill of Rights, and there was a lively debate over ratification about whether it was necessary to spell out things the government couldn't do. And the proponents, the Federalists of the Constitution as written, said no, the Constitution gives the government only certain powers, and it cannot do anything it is not explicitly authorized to do. The Anti-Federalists said people may read the language more broadly than that. And so if we spell it out, and it's not necessary, it does no harm. But if we don't spell it out and it turns out that it was necessary, that will prove to have been a very, very serious mistake. And so although the Constitution did not authorize the government to disarm the people, one of those things put into the Bill of Rights, along with the fact that the government could not infringe free speech, was that it could not disarm the people. Because the Federalists looked at the Anti-Federalist argument. These sorts of things happened in those days, the dark days of the past when people weren't as enlightened as us. The Federalists looked at the Anti-Federalist argument and went, yeah, okay, you're right, you win. We'll make sure the Bill of Rights gets passed. And so it did. Now, what about the Canadian Constitution? Why isn't it in there? Well, it is. Because remember, we inherited a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom. It says so in the Constitution Act 1867, which was formerly the British North America Act, and a lovely name it was too. Part of that constitution was the Bill of Rights, the 1689 British Bill of Rights. That was a condition of William and Mary being allowed to take the throne, that they agree that these were the ancient liberties of Englishmen which the state could not infringe. And that included the right of Protestant citizens to bear arms, because at that point Catholics were regarded with a great deal of suspicion. Gradually in Britain, that right was broadened. As I say, at the time of Sherlock Holmes, there were no restrictions in Britain on the possession of firearms. None whatsoever. And there were a very, very low level of firearm-related crime. And we inherited that system. And Sir John A. Macdonald firmly believed in it. People would come to him and say, maybe we should do something about these immigrants with their pistols or these radicals or some such troublemakers. And Macdonald said, in the first place, all you'll do is disarm the law-abiding citizens and leave the rowdies armed. But also he said, the Bill of Rights protects our Canadian right to bear arms. So in that sense, it was in our Constitution as well, and it was slowly eroded there. In Britain, it was taken away in a kind of panic over Bolshevism in 1920. It surreptitiously rushed through the Parliament. In the United States, it never has been taken away. But you look back to the original question about the disarming of the Scots. Yes, it was singling people out, and it was deliberately humiliating them. And if we are now prepared to have a government that singles us all out and deliberately humiliates us, then gun control is a good thing. But if we're not, then maybe we need to rethink this whole notion that governments are completely trustworthy and may be given all power, and citizens must be watched at all times and prevented from doing idiotic harm to themselves or malevolent harm to others.
Right, and if you're sitting there watching this and say, well, I don't even like guns, I don't have guns, this is not about me. It is about you, because we're not talking just about guns here. We're not talking about firearms, we're talking about citizens' right to self-defense using whatever weapons free citizens think are the best ones.
Including in the early 18th century in Scotland, a lot of these guys had guns, right? These guys didn't have shoes in many cases. We're talking about swords. They had their swords taken away. And if it had been the age of the longbow, they'd have had their longbows taken away. I mean, guns don't possess some inherent evil, right? That it's perfectly safe to have a sword. Though in this country, of course, you can't even carry, nunchucks. A woman can't have a dagger or pepper spray in her purse. But the guns have this strange reputation for somehow massacring people inherently. They're like demons. They take possession of the owner and blam, 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 blam. They're not. They're just another weapon. Yes, they're a deadly weapon. So is a claymore in the hands of an irate Highlander.
What's a claymore?
A great big sword.
Ah, I should maybe put a picture here. See, that's a claymore. All right, thanks for that. Folks, if you would like to play along, the URL on your screen will take you to a page where all the information is there for you if you want to ask your question of the professor. Thanks, and see you next time.